Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what is unfortunately already the final last event of the Just Peace Month. My name is HagueTalks. I am the former United Nations Youth Representative for the Netherlands, specifically on the topics of human rights and security. And I have the pleasure of being your moderator today for this last Hague Talks event. Now, since we have seen an amazing month full of events, I am incredibly happy to be here. But I'm even more happy to see that for the first time in a very long time, we are once again joined by an audience. So to everyone, let's give a round of applause for that. If you see me repeatedly pinching myself throughout the session, don't worry, I'm totally okay. I'm just doing quick reality checks to see whether this is real. But of course, as always, also a very, very warm welcome to everyone who is watching from home. Now, this is an interactive event, everyone, so we welcome you to ask questions. What that means for the people in the room here is that you can simply raise your hand if you want to ask a question in the specific question segment. But to everyone watching at home, you will see that there is a live chat function on your screen in which you can send us your question. There is a team working super hard backstage to send me as many of those as possible. So that's a promise to you that we will try our best to pose as many of them. Now, of course, it is always our aim to keep this conversation going, not just beyond this event, but beyond this Just Peace Month. And because of that, we want to encourage everyone here physically in the room, but also everyone who is watching, to keep the conversation going by using the hashtag JPM21 and by tagging us in all your tweets via @JustPeace2021. And since this is the last day of the Just Peace Month, it would only feel right to reflect upon an incredible 5 weeks that we've had with events. Can I see some hands in the audience if somebody attended a Just Peace Month event? Well, technically, you're actually already here today, so that would mean all hands, right? But it's good to see that a lot of people visited other events, because we have seen some major highlights, from peace runs to generational dialogues to events organized by all the partner organizations that we've had, but also, super cool things such as our own city poets cycling around through The Hague to talk with people about what peace and justice means to them. Or we have seen, for example, an event organized by the Dutch National Youth Council about climate justice, with the keynote by none other than Her Royal Highness, Princess Laurentien. And something special that happened only yesterday was the first ever Just Peace game. And let me touch upon that for a little bit, because sports has always been an arena that is incredibly important to fostering peace building, but also fostering and enhancing positive international relations with people from all places coming together. And because of that, we are more than happy that yesterday the Hague Royals dedicated their game to peace and justice. And to celebrate that with me, I want to ask on the stage our Deputy Mayor Saskia Bruines and none other than the captain of the Hague Royals, Davidos Koumales, to join me on the stage. Can we have a round of applause? So, thank you so much for joining us, Saskia, Davidos. I've asked you here, but before we go into conversation about what happened yesterday and why you did what you did, we have a short video that we can watch all together of the game.
We are proud to welcome you to the first annual Just Peace Game.
Well, that looks amazing. If I can start first off. Yes, we can have applause for that. Davidos, you being the captain of the Hague Royals, maybe I can start with you. Who are the Hague Royals?
So, nice to meet you, everybody. And so, Den Hague Royals is a brand new basketball team in top sport in Netherlands. And we just started last year. This year we have the first Just and Peace game, so we going in the right way.
Yeah, that's true. Very good point indeed. We love to hear it. We love to hear it. And Davidos, I mean, you made a decision to dedicate this game to justice and peace. How did you come to that decision?
You know, Den Hague is a just and peace city, so
Yeah.
we want to unite all the people There's audience from little kids till their grandparents and everybody. We have teammates from five internationals on our team.
Yeah.
So that's the perfect way to do it
Yeah,
in this way.
to bring all sorts of people together.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I heard from rumors on the hallway that you have something special that you want to present Saskia with. Please go ahead.
So yeah, we have a surprise. Yesterday we have Just Peace a game, and we have the jersey signed by all participants. So a little applause.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And maybe Saskia, if you would like to comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very impressed by this, and I wish you a lot of good luck with your Royals teams. And sport, in fact, is so important for bringing people together, and that's what we're all working on every day. So good luck, and thank you so much for this moment.
Yes, let's give it up one more time for Davidos Comales and the Hague Royals. Thank you so much. And Saskia, with that being said, the floor is all yours for some introduction words for this
Yes,
Just Peace Month's
thank
last
you.
event.
Thank you so much. Some introduction words and some words of looking back to the last 5 weeks. I've written it down because my English is okay, but not that good. So, ladies and gentlemen, here at the Humanity Hub and people who are at the other side of the screen, welcome everyone, welcome to the final closing event of what has been a successful Just Peace Month, built around the International Day of Peace, coordinated for this first time by the Hague Humanity Hub. Also, thanks for that. And let me take a moment to remind you what this series of events has been all about, and of course how this final event joins the dots. The International Day of Peace has always been an important day in the calendar of The Hague. This day started in one of the most important icons of peace in the world, the Peace Palace. The Sunday before the International Day of Peace started with a number of walking tours around the city. Volunteers from Volunteer The Hague took small groups from place to place, where people could hear some of the human stories of peace and justice directly from the institutions. In The Hague, we do have, and I'm very proud of that, an incredible ecosystem of organizations, big and small, all working towards a vision for a more peaceful and just world, showing citizens of The Hague what that ecosystem is all about. Inviting them to learn more about the work has been the heart of this Just Peace Month. And a lot of people are sitting here now, and I really want to thank you for your work in these 5 weeks, and of course all these other months in the year. But for now, thanks for this. We've seen over the last few weeks events which have brought people together, whether to watch a film, to find out how to get a job in this sector through the talent event, to understand better how organizations are tackling some of the huge injustices in the world. And that is, of course, what we want to achieve also as a city, as a municipality. Not only to host all these organizations that contribute to our image, but also to link them and to help them to become stronger. And I want to express my great thanks to all the participants again in this Just Peace Month, all the partners who have worked hard in these COVID-affected times, and to make virtual and in-person events happen, and have given a broad public the possibility to engage with the themes that matter to us all. So there we are today, to celebrate the United Nations on this closing day of the Just Peace Month, the International United Nations Day. And The Hague is a United Nations city, and proud to be the host of one of the major UN institutions, the International Court of Justice. And in today's HagueTalks, we will be exploring a huge issue, one of that we will all need to play a part in, including the UN, young people, old people, states and NGOs, and even politicians, as myself. And that is the issue of climate change. Just Peace Month has seen several events on climate change and climate justice. Events around creating new alliances, new platforms, events around the human stories of those who are being worst affected. And today we will hear more about this item on today's HagueTalks. So just before we start, I just want to say how much I'm looking forward for the next year, to 2022, when the municipality will again partner with the Hague Humanity Hub to bring those ecosystems in all its richness to life for a broad public. I can say often enough how proud I am to be able, in my small way, to support the organizations who make The Hague their home, as a place where they feel at home, because we are all committed to making the world a more peaceful and a more just place. And I want to thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saskia. Thank you for those warm words. And I loved how you said, making this a home for everyone because of the fact that we all come together and we're there for each other. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your words. Now, with those incredible introduction words for this Hague Talk session, I would like to start. Because with COP26 being just around the corner, and with the fact that today is indeed the official International Day of the United Nations, what more fitting theme can there be than a theme for this Hague Talks event, which will be all about the United Nations, local communities, and youth on how we can stop climate change together. And here to join us in that conversation, we are joined by an incredible lineup of speakers. They're sitting here on the first row, starting with our very first speaker, Eva Fleming, who is the current UN Youth Representative for the Netherlands on Sustainable Development, and who is also a member of the World's Youth for Climate Justice. Eva, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Eva. So good to have you here with us. And then we are also joined by none other than Hans van Dijk, who is one of the core members of Grandparents for Climate, an organization also supported by the United Nations Environment Programme. Hans, thank you so much for being here as well. And last but definitely not least, we have Maha Yassine, who is a junior researcher at the Planetary Security Initiative of the Klingendahl Institute, and who will share with us her story of her life in Iraq and how she has experienced the impacts of climate change firsthand herself over there. Thank you so much for being here with us as well, Maha. Now, with that being said, I want to do a quick reminder to our audience who are watching that you can submit your questions to us, and then we will pose them individually to the speakers or in the group discussion near the end. To everyone here in the audience, I'd say get your brain crackling and wackling. Think of all the comments, remarks, questions you want to ask. And then I want to invite Eva over to the stage for our very first Hague Talk speech. Eva, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hajar. It's really great to be here because the UN, climate, youth participation, these are all themes that lie really, really close to my heart. As I'm UN Youth Representative for the Netherlands on Sustainable Development, and for the past 2 years, my mandate is ending after COP. So for the past 2 years, I've been trying to navigate the UN spaces, the COP spaces, and making sure that young people's voices are being heard. Because this is a topic that is about human rights. It's the right to participation. It's also about the people who are being affected the most. And that's not only young people, but definitely young people and future generations have huge stakes in having a livable planet. And unfortunately, we're seeing that older generations are not living up to the responsibility that they owe towards young people and future generations. So before I get started with the initiative that I want to share with you, I would like to ask you, who here was born before 1960?
Uh-oh.
I know you're not alone.
I can't lift the other arm.
And who here has small children or has, also. Yeah. Because Save the Children published a report recently on how the climate crisis impacts children's rights, and it's quite shocking. every time I read the report and hear the figures, I can't believe it again. But children born in 2020 are facing 6 to 7 times as many heat waves in their lifetime as somebody who was born in 1960. And when I can definitely recommend you check out the report, and the article was also published in Science. When you look at the visuals, you can see that the climate impacts actually run along a very sharp age divide. And of course, within that, there are different inequities, also in terms of where you're located in the world, of course. So the climate crisis is a generational injustice, and that's what I'm here to speak about. But I can luckily also tell you that young people around the world are also working on this very, very hard, because what I've seen in the past 2 years is that young people are stepping up and living up to their solidarity, and they can see what is at stake. And I truly believe in young people making their intentions also into actions. So I have a lot of hope also for the future still. That was that's a question I always get. Do you still have hope? Next week, COP is happening, and I'll be going there as part of the Dutch delegation. And unfortunately, at COP, over the years, we've seen that states have entrenched in their positions, and they're not willing to compromise. And it's really, I think, it's also, there's a huge historical responsibility discussion that states don't want to engage in. And this is creating a global north-global-south divide that I think is the big elephant in the room, and that states really should address. And I think young people are trying to engage in these conversations and show solidarity that run across continents also. So that's also something that gives me hope. The initiative I want to speak to you about is called World Youth for Climate Justice. It started by an incredible person whom I had the fortune to meet at COP in 2019. His name is Solomon. He's also from the Solomon Islands, which is located in the Pacific region. And Solomon leads with a humility and with an extraordinary determination, despite all the challenges that he's up against. In 2019, Solomon told me that he was attending law courses, or he was attending his law class, and his professor spoke to him and his colleagues about his fellow students about the advisory proceedings at the International Court of Justice. The ICJ, as you probably know, is the UN principal judicial organ, which is located here in The Hague. And the court has the advisory proceedings function, which means that states, it's not a dispute between states, but through advisory proceedings, the court can contribute to the to the development of international law. And over the past, and since its founding, it has also dealt with issues of global peace, security, and justice, and also really been a means of diplomacy. That's also been translated outside of the UN spaces into impacts there as well. So what Solomon and his colleagues are doing, and what he told me about at COP, is that they want to go to the ICJ to request an advisory opinion on climate and human rights. And this is so important because it's the judicial body, the court can really look at what obligations states have, and they can make sure that that we work on climate ambition and climate equity, and that it's also young people, for example, giving statements, witness statements in front of the court, and NGOs contributing through written submissions to the court. So I think it's time that the court, the ICJ, gets involved in this matter. I think the court has dealt with such important topics in its history that the climate crisis cannot be ignored by them. And the way we can do this is by the UN General Assembly asking the court to do so. A few weeks ago, Vanuatu, a state in the Pacific, has announced that they support this youth-led campaign and that they will put this on the agenda of the UNGA next year. So that means that is a huge task for us. So what we are doing now we're working on the international movement World's Youth for Climate Justice. And we are asking states to support this at the UNGA. We're doing it by having one-on-one meetings with diplomats. We're doing it a lot of grassroots campaigning, by capacity building, teaching people. I just came from Berlin from a trainings camp where we had workshops on what the legal side, the diplomatic side, the lobby, the negotiation side of it. These are all expertises that young people need to have. So if you're in a position to offer guidance on that, that would be really valuable to us. And we also need people to open the doors for us, because still decisions are being made with young people outside of the room. So if you're in a position to open that door a bit, to invite a young person at your table, please do so. That can help us a lot. Because we can learn, we're young, and we are tackling together. It's not also not a generational divide in the way we're tackling this. The solution is we're all in this together. So we have to stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before us. We have to use the light of the people carrying the torch of knowledge, and we have to get into the rooms for people opening the doors for us. So we're on a journey to bring the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. Are you with us?
Thank you so much, Aoife. And that's a good question. Are you with us? Can we just see a hand for everyone who's in on this? Okay, that's a lot of people, so that's a good sign. Okay, thank you so much, Aoife, for those amazing words and all the amazing work you have been done. I'm wondering, are there questions from the audience?
Good.
That want to start? Yeah?
So Aoife, what do you think that the Netherlands should do in order to support this initiative? What do we need to do as the Dutch government, for example?
Yes, I'll just repeat the question quickly for the people on the live stream. I'm getting some directions from the back. So the question is, what does the Dutch government need to do in order to support this initiative?
It's really, really great news for our movement that Vanuatu has said they will put this on the agenda of the UN, because that means once it's on the agenda, formal negotiations can start. So what this means is that all states will get to decide on what the legal question that the court should answer should look like. And it also means that all states can vote whether they want this to go to the court or not. So I think the Netherlands, as the host state of the ICJ, also should really get involved in these negotiations. Vanuatu has a team of, I think, one person in New York. So that's not a way to lead negotiations. So the Netherlands could support financially in terms of having a bigger delegation, in terms of resources, in terms of thinking, using the best, brightest legal minds to think about what should a good legal question look like. And in the end, of course, voting in favor to send this to the ICJ.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I see we have received a question from our online audience. I will read it for you. The question is, the person says the best way to lobby is using reference points. And they're asking you, Aoife, are there youth organization or young people changing certain circles of society that you can partner with and use that platform to drive more attention and change makers to join? So I think the question is, which youth organizations are there that you can partner up with that are doing a lot of work on this already?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are so many good human rights, climate, youth organizations out there that we're not trying to set up another organization where we have a very specific ask, and I think it's really up to civil society to come together on this and ask for this as well. So what organizations can do is they can become a friend of the initiative, we call it. And by becoming a friend, you endorse it, you share it within your circles, on social media, for example, in your newsletters. And this way we can see that, the circle is growing. So there are different youth organizations in Europe, for example, supporting it. And we also just launched in another Just Peace event at the Peace Palace itself, we launched a coalition of Dutch children's rights and environmental organizations who are asking the Dutch government to support this. So if you're coming from an organization and you want to support this as well, you can also join the Dutch coalition.
That's amazing. So everyone who raised their hand just now, we have seen you, we have you on camera. You better become friends. I see a hand over there.
Yes, thank you very much for the interesting talk. So I think you're a diplomat, and your interesting idea also ask for some legal change in order to reach the goal. I wonder whether in your work you meet young people who don't believe anymore in this legal diplomatic efforts. I'm reading a book now that is called How to Bomb a Pipeline. And it's really about other alternatives way of pushing this climate change. It starts from the assumption that it's already known what needs to happen, the knowledge is there, but somehow it's not working. It's not that we don't have the legal framework, even the new SDGs is also include climate justice.
Yeah.
What is your do you know young people who don't trust the system anymore and maybe who are considering other means?
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question real quick. The question to Aoife is whether she knows other young people who don't believe in this way of pursuing climate action, and if she believes in other means than lobbying and diplomacy to get there.
Yeah. Really quickly, 2 points before I answer your question. I'm not a diplomat, I'm a youth representative, so that means that I go with the Dutch delegation to speak on behalf of Dutch youth. And World Youth for Climate Justice believes in peaceful tactics, so I just want having said that.
No bombing pipelines,
no
guys.
bombing. So having got that out of the way, to answer your question, I think definitely young people, there is a huge sense of urgency, and the ICJ and I think COP negotiations also, it's a very slow process. But we are working from the belief that the climate crisis can only be solved by international cooperation, and that even though within COP negotiations states are very entrenched, the ICJ as the judicial body can take a sort of a helicopter view, I guess, and think of future generations, can think of children, indigenous communities who are also not very well represented in the COP spaces. So that's why we believe that this is still a very worthwhile means to pursue.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question as well. Aoife, I want to thank you, and I want to immediately go on to our next speaker, Hans van Dijk. To everyone watching, remember your questions, because there is a bigger dialogue at the end, and then a big round of applause for Aoife and for Hans. Good luck.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. I must admit that I'm a bit nervous. Giving a speech like this with the cameras and stuff. I'm not used to that. I'm from an older generation. And learning by heart is not a strength of me either. And they forced me to try to do that. But I rely on my notes, like the deputy mayor did. And my English is also a bit rusty. So please forgive me if I falter, but I'll do my best. I like to address the younger generations tonight, and I like to make 3 points. The first point that I would like to make is about solidarity. And the second point is about responsibility. And the third point about human rights. Speaking of solidarity, I would like to thank the young people for the way in which they, in general, not always, not everybody, not everywhere, but in general, made a huge effort to keep the elderly safe during the COVID crisis. The t-shirt I'm wearing is all about solidarity. It expresses how the young and the old can mutually respect each other's interests. We want to keep you safe, and we thank you for keeping us safe during COVID. Despite the overwhelming use of digital tools and media, I could imagine that some of you have felt isolated or even depressed. But luckily, young people are resilient, and I'm sure that you will recover from the COVID period. In turn, you may ask from us, the elderly, that we do not only look at our own best interest, but also take your future into account. And climate change has huge implications. already at present, but more so in future. And I personally will not witness the consequences of a lifestyle that I and you have grown accustomed to. It is not sustainable to keep up a comfortable lifestyle that uses up 3 times the resources that the Earth can provide. And we have to reduce our ecological footprint. And we have to learn to restrain our consumption. Not only solidarity between generations is required, but also solidarity between the haves and the have-nots, both within wealthy countries like the Netherlands, as well as between the rich countries and the low-income countries. And the West has a huge historical responsibility for the climate crisis. The second point I'd like to make is about responsibility. Personally, I do not feel guilty about the life that I lived so far, but I do feel responsible. And responding to the court ruling that Shell has made is responsible concerning the CO2 emissions to a large extent. Jeroen van der Veer, the former CEO of Shell, made a remark and said, we are not a signatory to the Treaty of Paris. And we only respond to the demand of our customers. To me, that sounds like the logic of a drugs dealer. The oil, the gas, the coal sector has a specific and enormous responsibility for the climate crisis, and they should acknowledge that. Instead of his defensive response, Van der Veer could also have said, we at Shell accept our specific responsibility and we call for the sector to come together during COP26 in Glasgow for a side conference to come to an agreement to reduce the extraction of fossil resources and to switch to becoming sustainable energy companies as soon as possible. A point for discussion in being in this legal capital, which legal instruments can be put in place to force the fossil industry to stop drilling and pumping. And my third point is about human rights. The appeal that Grootouders voor het Klimaat, the organization I work for, makes is a moral one. For the sake of our grandchildren, we, the elderly, need to change our behavior. In Dutch we say, de jeugd heeft de toekomst. The future belongs to the youth. But we have to move away from just a moral appeal. We need to establish tools to give a voice to the ones that don't have a voice yet. In Dutch, een stem geven aan degenen die nog geen stem hebben. I propose to introduce a future generations test. Legislation needs to be legally reviewed against the consequences for the people without a voice, to protect their human rights. And this idea of a generatietoets was proposed before by the jonge klimaatbeweging in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, the Raad van State reviews the climate policy of the government against the consequences it has for the realizations of the aims of the Dutch climate law. Zero emissions by 2050 and 55% reduction by 2030. You could imagine that all laws are reviewed against the consequences they have for the future generations. Would this be a role for a climate authority, or for de Raad van State, or for the Hoge Raad? I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. We, Grootouders voor het Klimaat, we propose that the Constitution to be the basis for the review. And at present, that is not possible. The authority, or the council or the court, whoever is responsible for this in the future, should be advised by experts, and in the Netherlands by the Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving, the PBL. And in other countries where they have it, the Constitutional Court or the Supreme Court could take that role of a reviewer. By the way, isn't it strange that in the Netherlands we don't have a climate outbreak management team like the one we have for COVID? A team of scientists appointed to advise the government on the measures to be taken. The lack of a climate OMT can only be explained if the climate crisis is not considered to be a real crisis. Politicians lack a sense of urgency when it comes to the climate disaster, as Sigrid Kaag has put it. And I propose that younger generations demand that a legal future generations test is introduced, both nationally in the Netherlands as well as internationally, possibly during the COP26 conference. A moral appeal is not sufficient anymore. In order to force the generations with political and economic power, the young have to demand for a legal instrument. And you have to fight for your right. Thank you.
Hans, you can stay on the stage. That's okay, because I think you had a wonderful keynote, so there are probably many questions perhaps in the audience. So I'm going to shoot right away. Is there somebody who wants to ask a question? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Hans, for a wonderful statement. And actually, it's very interesting that you mentioned about the generational test, because right now, a lot of UN youth delegates from around the world are working on the request to propose a UN generational test at the United Nations to form a legal basis on all future resolutions and mandates. So would Grandparents for the Future for the Climate, in this case, support that initiative? And you're also invited for this event because it's also next week on the 1st of November, also here in the Humanity Hall. So
Okay.
it's really interesting.
I'll just repeat it real quickly for all the grandparents watching and for our live stream viewers. The question is, there are many UN youth delegates around the world working on this generational test, and the question to Grandparents for Climate is whether they are interested in joining the event and joining the initiative in itself.
Next Sunday, another Sunday, yeah? On Monday. Let's see afterwards whether it fits in the calendar.
Okay.
But I have lots of time.
That's amazing. Hopefully this can work out to be some good cooperation and partnership together.
But we will definitely support that.
That's amazing. Is there somebody else who wants to ask a question? Yes, in the back?
How do you think that immigrants, second generation immigrants, can change their way of consuming? Because you see that not at all. A lot of them have money problems and it's a little bit too expensive to, for example, replace meat for vegan food. So
Yeah.
how do you think that they can change their way of
Good point. I'll repeat the question quickly. The question is how immigrants and second generation people here in the Netherlands, but I think overall in the world, can get a sustainable lifestyle when they're very often we see that they're still struggling socioeconomically or with other issues. Whereas we see that sometimes you mentioned substituting meat for a vegan alternative can be expensive sometimes. So Hans, if you would.
Well, you can look for opportunities yourself, but I fully understand that not everybody in the Netherlands, and you try to make that point, mentioning that also within this country there are differences between people who are haves and people who have a low budget, or means that that's just sufficient to keep up living. And I think that the middle class, where I belong to, will have to take a big part of the burden here. But there are also opportunities. You can look for small opportunities, which still makes a difference. And politically, I think it's not the individual's responsibility. It's also, to an extent, the individual's responsibility. But it's a social responsibility. It's a responsibility of the whole society. And only political and economic powers can help us to change that. Yeah. For instance, the government could decide to abolish the taxes on labor in order for people with small purses to increase their income so that they can buy food alternatives.
Yeah, good point. And I love the point that you mentioned. I think this touches upon the very often used term called intersectionality. If you don't know it, then I'll explain it. But I think if you know it, then you've probably heard it a bazillion times before. It's very common jargon. But it actually says that, you know, when there's one social issue, such as climate change, that is not a standalone issue. It's interlinked with economic inequalities. As you said, not all people can afford a sustainable lifestyle. So we need to tackle that as well in order to improve sustainability overall. So I think that maybe also calls for what you said, Hans, and we've heard it from Aoife as well, that it's a human right approach that we also need within this climate discussion. Hans, thank you so much for your words. Okay. Thank you so much. We'll be back with you soon for the dialogue with the audience. But before we do that, I also want to invite Maha Yassin to the stage. So a big applause for the two of them, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Hajar. And welcome all, and also to the audience joining us online. I want to start by asking you a question. How many of you today thought while taking a shower that this could be your only one this week? Raise your hand. No, and I see no hands. Well, maybe there is hands online. Sorry? How many of you today thought while taking a shower that this could be your only one this week? Yeah, okay, so no hands. Well, I guess you know that I will be talking about water scarcity in Iraq that is induced by climate change. I grew up in a small town called Zubair to the west of Basra, and Basra is all the way to the south of Iraq. Zubair is very rich in oil, but very poor in water, despite being only 22 kilometers from Basra center, where Shatt al-Arab flows across the city. And Shatt al-Arab is formed when Tigris and Euphrates meet at the north of the city, and it flows to the Persian Gulf. Water has been always an issue in this town, but people have developed their ways to adapt. My mother, for example, has crafted the art of recycling and saving water. And I call it art because I believe it requires some level of creativity to be able to accommodate the limited amount of water that you receive every week to the needs of a family with 4 children. We were actually the last house in our street to run out of water, and sometimes our neighbors come and borrow it from us. And when there's not enough water, my mother takes us with the laundry and whatever she needs to wash to my grandmother's house. Their neighborhood was better in water supply. But this did not last for so long. Soon the whole town was struck by the lack of water. And my parents were tired and stressed of trying to find ways to bring and provide water to the household. For example, they were staying late at night waiting for the water to be pumped so they can fill in every jar they have. At that time, we never thought of the issue as a climate-related problem. We thought it's a poor water management problem and outdated infrastructure that was either bombed during the war or not maintained because of the economic sanctions. With the help of my uncle, we moved out of Zubair to Basra city center, and we actually lived close to Shatt al-Arab. There was a lot of water, and every time we opened the tap, the water was running without the help of the motor pump. We had a green garden, and of course, my mother was the happiest. But this also did not last for so long. This time, it was the quality of water. Our water had color. It smells sometimes, but the most difficult or big issue was salinization. And this happens when the water levels in Shatt al-Arab gets low and low with the time. Then the water from the Persian Gulf takes over. And then it becomes salty and polluted. So it becomes salty and polluted, of course. And then the most affected people were, of course, the farmers. With the time, we saw more fruits and vegetables imported from outside the country, and the farmlands were replaced by concrete building. They were selling the lands because they couldn't plant it anymore. So you see that most of the biggest problem that climate change has is on water resources in Iraq, which is the fifth most affected country by climate change worldwide. And communities, of course, have developed their ways, like they depend on groundwater, for example. They planted crops that water resistant or drought resistant, but they can only do little to survive, not to thrive. The problem gets bigger and bigger, and local politicians were not responding. And I think here comes the importance of raising awareness. And this is what I wanted to participate in. With Celsius degrees in summer, climate change was not affecting our daily life, it was also affecting our security. Because the water level was getting lower and lower, pollutants were concentrated, especially chemical and bacterial. And then people started to get sick, of course, and more cases were reported, and this happened especially in 2017 and 18, when the heat waves were extreme and water levels were at the lowest. People, of course, start to talk about it in social media, and soon this discussion turned into a grassroots campaign to demand clean water. The peaceful sit-ins turned into violent clashes between the security forces, local security forces, and the protesters. It went out of the control of the local government, so the central government sent the troops to control the situation and also shut down the internet so people stopped mobilizing each other. But this was not enough, like the tactic by the government. Soon other provinces joined these protests, including the capital. This protest that happened in 2018 gave the spark to a bigger movement happening in Iraq called Tishreen protest, which happened in 2019 and also early 2020. This one was so big, it actually toppled down the government. And only 2 weeks ago, early election took place in Iraq, and everyone is waiting what will happen after. I want to say that when local communities exhausted their solution, when their voice were ignored for so many years, they resorted to extreme measures. And if we want to help out, if we want to prevent such instability and insecurity in a country that has just started recovering from long years of wars and internal conflict, we need to help and support these small communities. At my work, as a junior researcher at the Planetary Security Initiative on climate-related security risks, I try to raise awareness that it's instability in Iraq doesn't come only from terrorism, from ISIS. It can only be instigated by climate change. And if we want to keep things stable over there, if we want to, yes, it's working now. If we want to keep things stable over there, if we want to prevent such conflict and bloodshed, basically, we need to include these communities in larger discussions with policymakers so they can accelerate their action on climate mitigation and adaptation. What we try to do is that we want to bring them around one table because we think that they do not communicate. And this is what they also told us. We went to local NGOs, to campaigns, we listened to them, and then we brought local politicians sit around one table to discuss this issue. And I think you can also help out by being informed of what is happening in these neglected parts of the world, and by also spreading the word among your wider professional networks. I think if the international community put a pressure on local politicians, then they will take serious action. They are counting on you, so don't let them down. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maha, for sharing that with us as well. You know, it's such a personal story, so thank you so much for opening up. And to the people in the audience right away, are there questions for Maha? Yes?
Yes, I would like to ask about the current situation. So is there any foreign partners, international partners, who help out people in those local areas, or is it just a discussion level now?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question real quickly. So the question is, are there international partners who are already helping out in the area, or are we only, unfortunately, in the discussion session now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the international effort actually goes to the northern part of Iraq, and this is because it's more stable over there. There is like a few and very little organization that comes to the south and only doing research. So they are still like in the phase of researching, providing like a small capacity kind of work to the people who want to address these issues so the local NGOs and the campaigns. But like an actual project that is happening on the ground, this is still not going.
Okay. Is there another question for Maha? Yes?
Well, not necessarily a question, but we met online before, so great to meet you in person here as well.
Yes,
I work for the Young Expert programs on water and food and energy, co-financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Iraq is one of our focus countries, so we hope that we can contribute to the challenges.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Look
Amazing.
forward.
Okay. Another question from the audience? Yes?
Did the desperate resort to violence actually result in improved conditions for the people? Because I think what we're hearing is it's urgent, and then people are driven to write and read books about bombing pipelines. It seems that, you know, unless the governments are actually seen to change something, then these feelings are going to simply increase if you just keep pressing them down. So was there actually any improvement for the people once they resorted to these demonstrations, or did they just put them down and then carry on as before?
Yeah. So the question is whether there is a link between the demonstrations and the earlier mentioned book about bombing a pipeline and the horrific conditions and the harsh conditions in which people are living related to the climate crisis, and whether the government is doing enough right now.
Well, unfortunately, the government is not doing enough, and they're like a small project, and these are always happening when the situation in summer gets like really worse. So they try like to patch the problem, but there is no long-term kind of solution for the salinization and pollution. And actually, like to comment on the pipe bombing issue. When the protest started, the first thing that people go to is the oil companies that are located in Basra. So they also want to go there and try to threaten the government, kind of, that if you are not going to give us water, if you are not going to solve the problem, we are going to affect the economy of the whole country, because the whole country depends on the oil industry that's coming from Basra.
Yeah, clear. Do we have another question? Yes?
So mine is more of a general question, just out of curiosity. Because I know that right now we've been talking about international communities and what they can do and all of that, but I haven't heard one thing about the government, which government is doing something that we can replicate somewhere else, for instance, or which government is a good example. Because eventually, if the government who are responsible for these things don't do anything, the way it is, we'll just be doing something, and these many people won't be doing anything.
Yeah. So quickly repeat it again. Is there an example of a government, or is there a government helping doing something right now that could be an example that others could replicate?
Well, because like the weather condition and climate issue is affecting also the Gulf countries, and they kind of have like the same issue. They also lack of water, and they depend on the Persian Gulf. So what the Iraqi government can do and learn from these like neighboring countries is like putting like more money in investing in bigger projects. And this is still not happening. This happened, we saw it happening in Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, but Iraq is still not able to provide water. Because I think of the assumption that there is two big rivers. So you think that the country is very rich in water, but it's actually not. The water is polluted, and it's not enough for 40 million people living in this country.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maha. Thank you so much for your amazing keynote, for answering our question. I'm going to ask you to stay on the stage because I want to ask Hans and Aoife to join us over here as well, because then we can start this section where we are taking questions from our audience here physically and more questions for the group from our audience watching at home. So all those questions you had in your mind, get them ready to ask, because we are diving into it really deep now. Yes, go ahead and take a seat, and then we can start. Yes. Also in between, don't forget to tweet online. You can use the hashtag JPM21 and tag us in all your tweets as well, so we can see them back and retweet via @JustPeace2021. Now I'm gonna turn around and see everyone sitting perfectly in their seats. That's amazing. Wow. Okay, so starting right in, hopping right into it, is there a question to our joint panel that anyone wants to start with? Yes, Janet?
I'm getting a bit confused by all of the information that's coming out in the run-up to COP26. There's just this flood of stuff, and I'm asking each of the three of you, what should I look for? What's the key thing that I should be looking out for?
Okay.
That's actually going to be important, and I'm happy to hear from all of you. What do you think I should really, really care about in that meeting?
Okay, so what should we look out for? What is going to be important leading up to COP26? Maybe we can have all of them answering it. Does any one of you want to start?
A little diplomat.
Oh, our big grand diplomat, Hans, you mean? Okay. Yeah, maybe. Oh wow, nice. Maybe Aoife, you have visited the previous COP in Madrid last year, and you're gonna visit COP next week. What are you looking out for that is gonna be like impactful?
Yeah. I think I'm looking for a few different things. I think when countries come together, it's a good moment for countries to raise their ambition and to have more ambitious climate pledges. So I think any new pledges or more ambitious pledges being announced is really a really important signal. And I think also in Paris, the developed countries made a pledge to give $100 billion to developing countries, and I think if that pledge is met, I think that's also a sign of commitment, and I think it will really show that global South countries are being taken seriously. So I think ambition and finance are the two things I'm looking out for.
Yeah. Hans, I see you nodding. Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree, but I'm a bit pessimistic because the money that was dedicated on paper by the wealthy countries in order to support the less developed countries. If I read newspapers, and I read in the newspapers that it is on paper but not in practice, and I'm rather pessimistic about that.
Okay.
And the same is applying to the 1.5 degree. I'm afraid we're going to miss that because of pledges made in Paris, but not being met. And that's a big issue. And I'm growing a bit more radical all the time because I see politicians speaking up at the conference, but not doing the things that they have to do back home.
Yeah.
That's why I want everybody to come to the
The
conference.
climate march, I see on the 6th of November. Everyone, if you want to get a flyer, I see that Hans has them. So tackle him afterwards if you want to get one, and also to our live audience. Okay, so I hear Aoife, you saying financing. You are, on the other hand, not as optimistic about whether those finances are actually going to get to the places where they need to be at. Maha, maybe I can ask you, because you so vividly describe to us what the realities of climate change are. Do you feel like the world leaders stepping into COP26, do you think they see those realities enough that they know about them?
Well, I think they know about them, about what is happening mostly in the West, to be honest, but there is little information that's coming from MENA region in general.
Yes.
Although like climate change is happening as twice as the rest of the world over there. So I think these countries of course are sending delegations and they are going to talk about what is happening. But I also would like to know from the big countries, like from the Western countries that made a pledge, like what is the progress?
Yeah.
If there is actually, if the goals that they said, have they met them, like in these countries, and then with that compare, because I also read that these are not, the goals are not met yet. So if this has not happened in the West, can you imagine what is happening in the MENA region?
Yeah, yeah.
That's nothing have been done actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, true point indeed. So accountability, I hear a lot about that in what you're saying. Okay, thank you so much. Is there somebody else who wants to pose a question? Yes. In global? Do you believe in global carbon pricing as a tool to improve climate action, I think? Who wants to start with that one?
I think I do not have a lot of information on that, but I read or in the news I heard about it, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
It can help the world definitely.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hans, I see you nodding.
I'm not an economist, but I think when big companies feel it in the purse, they will change their behavior.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And maybe to also ask you, Aoife and Maha, because you mentioned also in your talk, Hans, that you think it's not just individual responsibilities. There are individual responsibilities, but it's also a societal responsibility with companies in them and government. Aoife, Maha, how do you look at that? Do you see it more as an individual, more as a corporate, governmental responsibility? Aoife, do you want to start?
I definitely believe in a global approach and in a collective responsibility. Everybody has, especially different countries, have different responsibilities when you look at the historic greenhouse gas emissions. But I definitely believe that's also why we're looking towards the UN judicial organ, that this has to be done has to be tackled, that the leadership has to come from a global level, and then I think individuals can of course have their contribution as well, but the leadership should really be coming from states.
Yeah, okay. Maha, do you agree?
I totally agree, and I think individuals have already taken bigger measures than companies. So now it's the role of company and investors to do more.
Yeah, it's time for them to step up their game indeed. That's a good one. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, you.
Thank you very much for that answer. Following up on that, I think I heard a lot of talk about government and government responsibility, especially speaking about the more global, less individualist approach. but what would you say is a solution? Because governments are not always reliable, as we've heard, as we all know. Not even the quote-unquote stable governments we know of the, well, taking the lead. I don't want to say we know of the West, there are stable governments all over the globe. But it is not always reliable. And what do you think is an approach there, or might be a solution there?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we deal with the fact that unfortunately not all governments are reliable when it comes to taking climate action? Is there another way we can get around that? Aoife, do you want to start?
I think, again, the advisory opinion at the ICJ is one way to do this. I think it's a means to increase ambition and equity within the climate space, but it's also a means to sort of get all the states moving forward. So I think it's both to do better than is pledged, but also those who are lacking behind to make sure that there's another thing to hold up and say, you should really be moving. And I think states are vulnerable to this kind of international pressure and being called out.
Yeah, Hans, do you want to add anything?
I would like to add that states are not only responding to their peers internationally, but also to their populations. And if you look at the abundance of initiatives that are there, I was at the Trouw Duurzame Top 100. Mm-hmm. And if you see those 100 initiatives there, and there are so many more, then there are a lot of people who really want to make a change. And that should become clear. And that's the way in which we, as citizens, and as voters can put pressure on the politicians to act.
Yeah, that's a good point indeed. Maha, do you want to share?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in my speech that politicians need to listen to local communities, and I think then maybe then they will feel a pressure to do something. I feel like decision makers and policy makers, sometimes they live in a bubble. They don't know what is happening in countryside. They don't know how people are affected. They are leaving their houses and selling their lands to move to cities that is already struggling. I'm speaking about Iraq, of course. And if we put them together, if they listen to each other, then maybe there will be like a government movement to actually do something.
Wow, I love how you called that a government movement instead of like a civil movement, or we should get a government movement indeed. Is there another question? Yes?
Question from on Iraq. Can you tell a little bit how climate change there impacts different kind of social classes? And another question is, how does the younger generation look at climate change in Iraq?
Yeah, so two questions for Maha. How does the climate crisis there affect different social classes, and how do young people in Iraq look at the climate change that is happening?
Yeah, well, definitely it's affect people who live in villages way more than people who live in the cities. Although, like, people, of course, who have money, or like if you are a middle class, you can buy the water, and this is always the case in Iraq. You always buy your drinking water. But the water now, when it started to get polluted, people who afford to buy it, they also do. But this is not the case for people who comes from small villages. They still struggle, and it's a financial burden on them. So they move to other places, and of course this is still affecting their life. And to answer your second question, I think the only group of people who are responding to climate change are the young people in Iraq.
Oh.
And they are doing this mostly through like campaigns on social media, small NGOs for plantation, or so. Like, the work is still very limited. They are not supported that much, but it's growing.
Yeah. That's indeed incredible to hear, and it's actually such a shame that it's only the young people. Aoife, I saw you nodding. Do you recognize this, perhaps also from encountering internationally other young people?
I think it's really interesting to hear that, and I think young people feel the urgency, and I think it's because we know the climate impacts that are already being felt today by so many young people around the world, especially in the Pacific, in the Caribbean. Small island states are really vulnerable to climate impacts, but also about what we know is going to come in the future. Yeah. And I think it's when young people are giving these, collecting together and making their voices heard. I think it's so important that this is taken really seriously, not only by listening, but by inviting young people in, because in the end, I think through meaningful youth participation, we can make more fair and more ambitious decisions that are actually in line with the 1.5 degrees warming goal of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, good point. And well, we hear a lot of young people are doing things. Hans, you are not a young person anymore. You were at one point. You still look very young. That's a given. But how can we get your fellows on board? It seems that the people in the government who are generally a bit older and the people in diplomatic higher positions, that they're not really getting the urgency as of yet. How would you get your fellows along? Deep sigh.
I wish more people would, only for the sake of the younger generations. Only, we say grandchildren. I don't have grandchildren yet. But young people, the children from now, they probably will witness the start of the 22nd century.
Yeah.
We can expect life expectancy is 80 years in the Netherlands, and we're in 2021.
Yeah.
So implications are huge, and people my age should think about that generation, about people being their age by then, and the world they will have to live in. Yesterday we saw in the news that on Greenland the ice is melting faster and faster. And already I worked at Utrecht University before, not as a scientist, but in the administration. And I remember an article about one of the glacier scientists who said that the smaller ice caps on Greenland are already irreversible melting.
Oh, wow.
So that's what's happening already now. So that we cannot do anything about that anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the sense of urgency. I would like to try to pass on to my age group and say, come on, let's do something and get there on the 6th of November and be out there, be visible, and be solidarity. It's not an English word, but solidarity.
Have solidarity with.
Have solidarity with the young generations.
Yeah, can we get a round of applause for that? Because I just love that. Amazing. Yes, I see that we have another question.
It has been mentioned a few times that current politicians don't get the sense of urgency, and I've been thinking about German elections because I don't follow Dutch politics, and there was a Green Party getting more and more votes compared to previous elections, and the real chance at a certain point that the Chancellor could have been from the German party, from the Green Party as well. This didn't happen for different reasons, but isn't it, instead of bombing pipelines or hoping for diplomats or politicians to catch finally the sense of urgency, is it not better to, as for instance, to support green parties and to put people out of government and replace with less economically driven parties, but more consciously and sustainably driven politicians?
Okay, so the question is whether it's not a better lobby tactic to look at the general elections and then specifically support the green parties that are in parliament. Hans, would you like to comment on that, perhaps?
Yes.
Go ahead, please. The floor is all yours.
And I noticed very well that our Prime Minister, Mr. Rutte, was very keen in keeping the climate crisis out of the discussions when we had the general elections earlier this year. I remember that the RTL the debate on a Sunday evening, he said, well, we have the Klimaatakkoord, and we're just going to implement that, and that's it. Nothing else needs to be done. That's totally irresponsible, as far as I'm concerned. So yes, we have a vote, and we can make a difference, not the difference, but a bit of a difference by the parties we vote for. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, clear. Another question, perhaps. Yes.
Thank you, and thanks to all three talks. So it's really captivating, and for all the calls for action. I was just wondering. I've heard about the government, grandparents, youth, the private sector. So many that we need to step up and act. Now we're here at UN Day, United Nations Day. I look at the title, the UN, local communities and youth. How can we stop together? But I don't hear a role for the UN as an organization. Do you don't see it? Or what is there a role for the UN as an organization?
Yeah, good point. So the question is, what is the role of the United Nations, especially considering that today is International UN Day? What is their role in trying to combat the effects of the climate crisis and getting climate action? Maybe logical to ask you, Aoife, being the UN youth representative?
Thank you for your question. I think that the UN definitely has a role to play in that, but I think also that the UN itself is comprised of member states. So in the end, it's about it's also about what is the composition of our governments and how that is reflected in UN decisions, of course. So I think. The UN, for example, as the judicial organ, they can play a role in really developing international law to make sure that the most vulnerable and future generations are being protected. But I also really see a role for young people, for example, within the UN. So not all, we have in the Netherlands, we have the UN Youth Representative Program, but it's mainly European states who have this, and not every state can afford to send a young person to COP, which is crazy expensive to attend at this point. So I think making sure that young people get into those spaces, UN spaces where the decisions are being made, and getting invited to have a seat at the table, not just protesting is so key, and I will also be there on 6 November, but also then the next step I think is also being invited into the room and making decisions jointly on that.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much, Aoife. Question. Yes?
Thank you. First of all, the mention about meaningful participation, that's very important. And also amazing to see a multiple female panel at once. That's good as well.
Nice.
That's not buzzword. Yeah, definitely. No, but the question when it comes to when you had it about carbon pricing and you talked about water as well and scarcity, but people who have money are enabled to buy, for example, water. Aren't we then too much thinking from a more of an ecocentric perspective? And when you only look at the companies to make it more incentivizing for them to stop using that much carbon, like by putting a high price on it, aren't we then waiting too long for them to act instead of saying the other way around? We should decide what you can do instead of waiting until them to decide for us what they will do. Because right now that's what we have been doing for the past couple of decades, and we see that waiting on them is not going to help because they can just relocate in lower economic developed countries and remain cheap. So wouldn't you say that that systematic change needs to start at where the money flows to, so that it's from a more of an economic perspective in the first sense?
Yeah.
This is a question for all, but especially for the youth in this case.
Okay, no, good question. So the question is, we see often that when we say, okay, we want carbon pricing, or we at least want to see more action, that we put that we really give a lot of liberation to companies to decide when and how, and with the urgency that we're facing right now, how do we go about that? Is carbon pricing enough? Because companies can also relocate to other global south countries where they can emit these legislations. So how do we go about that? Maha, could I start with you?
I think if there is an international law that applies for all companies, for all the private sector, if there is a penalty that is put on them, even if they go to these countries, then I think they will respond better. The thing is, like, yeah, these companies will always find a way to make more money. So, and there are countries also who are benefiting. There are governments that are corrupted, who actually open the door for these companies to come and invest in their countries and hurt the people, but then the government politicians are the one who are benefiting. But if there is a law that applies for all, then I think this will stop.
Okay, yeah. Aoife, do you want to add?
This actually makes me think of a class that I went to last week. I went to a secondary school to speak about sustainable consumption and production. And the young people in the room, they knew about sustainability and they were concerned about unsustainable practices. And then when we had a conversation about vegetarianism and veganism, there were some people doing it, but a lot of people had the feeling like, well, I'm one person, what am I going to do? So I think also to make sure that we don't have that feeling of it doesn't matter anymore, I think the companies and the states with the larger responsibility should be setting the right example and showing that things are being done and that everybody has to join in, and no matter how big or small your contribution is, it's still valuable and it's necessary.
Yeah, good point. Hans?
Oh, that's true. Of course. Yeah.
Okay, so you agree fully.
Yeah.
That's amazing to hear. Do we have another question from the audience? Yes, please.
So following up to what he said, the question is that the current economic growth system, which is capitalism right now, which depends upon consuming more and more, and which leads to environmental exploitation and resource exploitation. So how can we reimagine economic growth as a whole system? Because under capitalism, we won't be able to attain sustainability and fight climate change because it leads to resource exploitation.
Yeah. So let me repeat that for the viewers watching from home. Also, don't forget to submit your questions and let us know. The statement in question was that, you know, we're in this current capitalistic system, which is about consuming and consuming more, and which inevitably leads to environmental exploitation. So the question to the panel is, do we not need to reimagine our economic system? In another way, is capitalism still working with the climate issues that we are faced with right now? Who wants to jump in right away? That's a very light question, so, you know, very casual. Hans, do you want to start?
Read Kate Raworth.
Read Kate Raworth? Okay.
Raworth, yeah, the donut economy, because that's where the economic theory, where it addresses the limitations. How can there be limitless economic growth within a globe that has a limit? Yeah. There must be an end to that somewhere. I don't know exactly where. I'm not an economist, I said before. But I cannot, as a citizen, I cannot imagine that you keep on growing. We are so privileged in a country like the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And we're unaware of that. We shy away from acknowledging that. And that's a problem. There it starts. We have to change our mentality, and we have to respect the boundaries of our globe.
Okay, so I got a secret message from the people backstage in the invisible ear that I'm wearing. But we are almost nearing the end of this session, but we still have room for, I think, a last question from the audience. So who wants to do me the honor of posing the last question for this event? Yes, sir. To you the honor.
Or 7 governments, the USA, the UK and Europe used to be one, but the European Parliament, Russia, India and China. These are the main culprits. And of course we know that the West historically also has contributed a huge amount.
Yeah.
So if we were to just focus on that and converting those utilities into things which generated, and there are solutions, fossil fuel free electricity.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter, you know, in some respects, it dwarfs everything else that we can do. So my question is, how important is it, for example, that Putin and Xi, the two presidents of the two of the biggest polluting countries, are not going to be at COP26? And what impact do you think that will have on us doing anything really meaningful in the short term to address this problem?
You said not be at COP26.
They're not going to be there.
Ah, okay, yeah. So the question for people at home is, we see that the fossil fuel sector, so gas and oil, that we see that is such a large, substantial amount, and the cause of a lot of pollution that we see in the sky. It really dwarfs other causes for the climate crisis that we see. Usually these companies are linked to government or they're government owned, and the question to the panel is, we have a lot of Western countries that are among these bigger polluters when it comes to the fossil fuel sector. How do we go about tackling those countries specifically? What is their role within this? Aoife, do you want to start?
I think it's really disappointing that these leaders are not attending, because it's such a bad signal and such a bad way to start the climate conference on which so much is depending at this point, I think. And yeah, it's a tough question, because I feel like it also touches upon sort of what the previous discussions about what actions matter, and how optimistic are we about the future. But I think we owe it to young people and to marginalized communities around the world who have contributed so little to this problem, that we cannot give up, and we cannot say, well, if they're not doing it, we're not going to do it either, because that would be completely out of line with our responsibility. So I think, unfortunately, there are very unfortunate circumstances under which COP is happening this coming weeks, but this shouldn't deter us from fulfilling our own responsibility and living up to the actions that we have promised.
Yeah, good point. Maha, do you want to add to that shortly?
I totally agree with you, Eva. These, China and Russia and also India, have always been, even during the UN Security Council discussions on climate security, these are the countries who are always have an opposite opinion, that climate do not impact or affect security. And we've been following these discussions, and I feel like I've been following this since I started working with the Klickendal, and it's always the same position. They're not changing their position. So, as Eva said, it's unfortunate, but countries cannot do much for them at this point. The only thing that we can do is that we put more pressure on them to change their policies.
Yeah. And Hans, for some final words?
When you go there, don't be too polite about it.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Thank you so much, Hans. I can assure you, by the way, I know Aoife, we go way back from our time as colleagues. She is definitely not polite about it, so no, everything should be okay with that. Can we have one big round of applause for our panel, everyone? Now, unfortunately, I would say time flies when you're learning so much new stuff, but we are unfortunately almost nearing the end of this event. I want to thank our wonderful panel and also our wonderful audience joining us here live, but also, of course, our trusted viewers watching from home, comfortable on their sofa or from work, wherever you are. Thank you so much for tuning in with us, not just during this event, but during the past 5 weeks with all the amazing events that we have seen. If you're sitting here and you're wondering about all the events that have taken place, I would encourage you to visit our website, justpeacethehague.com, to take a look at all the events that took place and maybe gather some inspirations from the sessions that have taken place. And with that being said, I also want to thank, of course, our incredible partners without whom none of this would have been possible. So here it comes, a big shout out to the Municipality of The Hague, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, World Youth for Climate Justice, Klickendal Institute, Grootouders voor het Klimaat, the Hague Humanity Hub, the Hague Royals, and so many more. Can we get a big round of applause, everyone? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all your hard work. Now, just because the Just Peace Month is ending here doesn't mean that all the hard work that still needs to be done when it comes to peace and justice ends here. We want to encourage you all to keep the conversation going, and we really mean it. Engage with organization. Do what Maha said. Communicate with local organizations that are working near you on peace and justice and other topics related to that. Speak to young people, speak to older people, speak to all sorts of people about these issues, because we have work to do and we can only do it together. So with that being said, I want to thank you so much for staying along with us. We hope to see you next year for the next Just Peace Month. Have an amazing evening. We love to see you again. And to everyone sitting here, we can have a chat later on with some drinks over there. And with that being said, have an amazing, amazing week.
Come a little closer. I feel a little light in the light track. I felt a bit of bad, but I came back. There's still a little light in the light crack. There's still a bit of good, so good. And I know just what to say. And I know just what to do. And I'm so sick of pain, but it's all too quick with you. Losing this game, I can't afford to be losing this game. And I know you're the safest bet. Losing my mind, can't find the words, no, I can't seem to find.